As we said, our guest tonight is Kirk Frederick, who's written a fascinating book called Write That Down, the comedy of male actress Charles Pierce. And if you're not familiar with Charles Pierce, here's an interview with Dick Cavett in 1981.
If you would welcome the gentleman himself, Charles Pierce. Did you do this as a kid? How was it born?
Well, I go way back. I started doing impressions of Brenda and Kobina on the Bob Hope radio show. And, well, someone said, oh, remember Brenda and Kobina? And Vera Vague, oh, yoo-hoo, Mr. Hope, a sailor.
I remember that.
Am I the only one on earth who remembers Vera Vague?
No, you definitely are not. Or I'm the other one.
No, I think Carmen Miranda was the first one. Mother had a bowl of plastic fruit on the piano or whatever, and I was doing, South American way, and I did Mae West as a 9-year-old going off to school, and then I took a long break and went into radio and Pasadena Playhouse, going to be an actor. Would jump ahead 15 years, and then all of a sudden I realized I could do a nightclub act and be paid every Sunday night rather than once every year as an actor. For 27 years I've been doing the nightclub circuits.
Did you say you did Mae West as a 9-year-old or Mae West as a 9-year-old?
I did Mae West as a 9-year-old.
A 9-year-old Mae West?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always said that sex is a misdemeanor. The more you misdemeanor you get.
Is that an actual line of hers?
No, my mother gave that to me. Mother gives me lots of lines.
I love Las Vegas. I went up to the gambling tables a few weeks ago, and there was a tall, dark, and handsome croupier. He said, Miss West, I'd love to lay you 10-1. I said, an odd time, but I'll be there.
Why do you like to be called an impressionist rather than a female impersonator?
Well, because I'm doing impressions of those stars rather than impersonator. Mm-hmm. Female impersonator is someone who dresses up as a woman who he would be his alter ego, and I think that's a female impersonator.
His aim is simply to appear to be a woman.
As a woman, like if I suddenly pounced on you and gave you big red lips and eyelashes and a wig and sent you on your way, you'd say, oh look, there goes a female impersonator.
Yeah.
But I don't think you'd like it.
I never tried that. I don't know. I shouldn't knock it.
I'll come back.
I didn't tell them that I played Eleanor of Roosevelt in Lion in Winter. Not Eleanor, Aquitaine, that was the part I played. Eleanor Roosevelt, I remember her, feisty old broad. Franklin! If you can have a mistress, so can I. Lorena Hickok wanted to see the inside of a national monument. So I let her.
That voice started because I, 1,000 years ago, was a record clerk at Nash's in Pasadena. And Betty Davis did an album from her Broadway show called Two's Company. And she was having vocal problems because she had a jaw problem at that time. I, in turn, had a bad cold, which affected my throat, so I was able to match her voice on the album. So my voice sounds like I have a cold sometimes when I'm doing Betty, because that's how I started doing an impression of her.
Darling, I lost my cigarette. Who has a cigarette in the front row? Thank you. I knew you would. I knew you'd have a cigarette for me. You don't have a cigarette. Thank you. Lit!
How fun. I can't wait to hear more about Charles Pierce and his good friend and confidant, Kirk Frederick. Kirk, come on in.
Hello. Hello, hello, hello.
Oh my goodness, that was so much fun.
That man had, every time I see that, I laugh out loud, and I've seen it how many times. Best comic timing, I think, of anybody. That moment when he takes the cigarette and goes, "What?" That was at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, packed. 32.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
I love during that interview where he'd say a line and just look at the audience. All right. So what was your function with Charles?
Well, it started, I was sort of his stage manager and dresser backstage. We actually first met doing a legitimate play together in San Francisco in 1969. I was playing a young gay boy that had been brought home by an even younger gay boy from a frat party, and his mother was played by Charles Pierce. So it was one of those sort of gimmick casting things, but it worked well because Charles really had studied acting at the Pasadena Playhouse. He was a very good actor, but he was even a better actress. And almost in the Shakespeare mold of men always playing the women, Charles said, let's do this seriously, legit. It wasn't campy. He didn't do it like Betty Davis all over the top. It was a serious acting role, and he was very good. Well, Monday nights during Geese, it was a regular equity run, and we did Tuesday through Sunday. Charles wanted to keep his comedy chops up doing his nightclub act. So Monday nights, he would start doing his nightclub show at the Encore Theater in San Francisco. And my then partner and lover, Peter, and I became his stage managers and dressers. And then he said, why don't you do a Dames at Sea number with me? So then we started acting with him. And so it became part of it happened. There it is, from Dames at Sea. And so
were you lucky in that? Or was your character lucky in Dames at Sea?
He was lucky. Yeah, I was lucky. Very lucky.
I love Dames at Sea.
Oh, it's just such good fun. It really is.
All right. So, Kirk, tell us about your life prior to that. What led you up to that, being in that show with Charles?
Well, actually, in the 60s, I was in college at Santa Clara University down south of San Francisco. And the summers were California Shakespeare Festival. So I was a sort of trained Shakespearean actor. So we did a lot of Shakespeare, a lot of classic theater. And then I decided I would go in and teach high school. Well, that lasted about a month. I didn't like it. I wasn't good at it. I just said, no, this is not working. So I moved to San Francisco. And one of the first things that I saw was an audition for Geese, a new gay play, Some Nudity Required. And I had just done a student film in Santa Clara where I ran around the forest in the nude. And I thought, well, I can do this. I'm not afraid. I'm not ashamed. So I auditioned, and they hired me as the understudy of this guy. And about 2 weeks later, the guy that was playing the role left, and I got to be in the show. About 2 months later, they hired Charles Pierce to play the mother of my boyfriend. So my career went from classic Ibsen, Shakespeare, all those great classic roles, into nude on stage, playing a young gay boy with his mother, played by Charles Pierce. So,
how long did that show Geese run?
It ran just a little over a year, I think. We went into in 1970 with it, and then by then we were so I don't know. We had our whole life was Charles Pierce, pretty much, other than the show. So he came down to L.A. It's where I live now, to work at Ciro's nightclub. It was the old, what's now the Comedy Store. Ciro's was a classic old nightclub in the 50s and 60s. And the woman that ran it said, Charles Pierce, I'd like you to close Ciro's. So Charles did the last engagement. It ran so long, we went back to San Francisco to collect things, and we moved to LA and ran for a little over a year at the Comedy Club. It was called Ciro's at the time. And then that just started working with Charles all over the country, all over basically the United States.
And what years did that start when you started going?
1970, and then I worked with him for 20 years until I left San Francisco in 1990 to go work on cruise ships. And so our engagement ended that. I went to sea. And Charles pretty much retired after 1990 anyway. He'd been doing it 30 years. So, it was enough.
Boy, 1970, and he was traveling the country. What cities did you play in the early 70s?
Well, mostly the big gay-centered cities. I mean, obviously New York. We played at the top of the gate, the old Village Gate then. And eventually he did the Ballroom and he did Freddie's nightclub. And then, of course, we played Chicago. We played Miami. We played Houston, Dallas, Seattle, Los Angeles a lot. He opened for Anne Margaret at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas in 1978. I know. Thank you.
We've got some pictures and some clips of some of his characterizations. We've seen him do Betty Davis, but here's a picture of him as Betty.
That silly prop lighter, don't you love that?
Oh my gosh! And then we have a clip of him doing Betty as well. Let's watch that.
Oh, here's Betty Davis.
I'll never forget my films, and I'll never let you forget my films. Especially some of the stinkers like Beyond the Forest. I was Rosa Malene, a 12 o'clock girl in a 9 o'clock town, waiting for 2 a.m. with 5 o'clock shadow. I've never been so relaxed. I took a Valium a year ago.
Who wrote his material?
This funny guy named Charles Pierce wrote all of his material. You believe that? He would buy an occasional line. He had 2 or 3 other writers that gave him things, and he would pay. He bragged, I didn't pay any more than $5 for a line ever. And he didn't. But he wrote, I would say 99% of the material that he wrote. That's why I wrote the book, because it really never was written down. And the reason it's called Write That Down is that he was so good at ad-libbing. He was constantly improvising on stage. Betty Davis would come out and we didn't know where it was going to go, depending on the audience, which was fun for Charles. But he had a great routine that he stuck to most of the time. I mean, we had an ending cue, but in the, say, 20-minute schedule set for Betty Davis, he might go off and do other things. So there were many times backstage when I'd hear this hysterical laughter and a place in the show I wasn't used to hearing it. And then I'd hear, Kirk, write that down. So, and I had missed the line. So that's why we started in the late 70s, videotaping every show he ever did. Thank God, because not only could he then go and watch the show and write down any ad-lib lines, but we had a permanent record. I still have 400 videotapes of his shows that one of these days I'm going to put on digital and do something with them. We posted, there's a lot of him on YouTube. I mean, it's wonderful. You can search for Charles Pierce and find him all over YouTube. But go ahead.
We have a picture of him as Carol Channing that just fascinating. And it looks so much like Carol Channing as well. The mouth and the eyes. Just
look at that glow. I mean, it's it's the same costume he's wearing here with Paul Lynde.
Well, before the show, tell us the story about Paul Lynde, just how they got along.
Well, famously, obviously, they were 2 of the funniest people, and being at a party with them, or whenever Paul came to see Charles's show, they'd be backstage, and everyone would just sort of sit back and say, "Okay, go," because the 2 of them ad-libbing and then tried to top each other. And say, I wish I had written some of that stuff down, because that was really, really fun. But it's very funny. 2 comedians sometimes will get together and not like each other because it's almost a competition. Charles got along with everybody he ever met backstage. It was just fascinating to watch him. He was not only a brilliant performer, he was a very social person. He loved
Now, with Carol Channing, did Carol Channing ever see him perform her?
Actually, it's interesting, Amber. The only woman that Charles impersonated that ever saw his act was officially Carol Channing. She came to see the show at Gold Street when we were there in the early 70s. As a matter of fact, she knew the all the writers and producers of Applause, they wanted to do a production of Applause that Lauren Bacall had done on Broadway. They wanted to do it in San Francisco, and they would not give Charles the rights. So we don't want a man playing, her. So Carol Channing wrote Condon and Green and his other friends that were involved with Applause and said, Charles Pierce is the perfect person to play. And so she basically was responsible for getting him the rights to do Applause in San Francisco. She was great friends. They were great friends throughout her whole life. I'll tell you a quick side story that I think I wrote in the book. Betty Davis was brought to Studio One, a big nightclub in LA, to see Charles in the mid-70s sometime. And I found out about it from one of the waiters, came in and said, Betty Davis is here. And I said, oh, well, I'm not going to tell Charles because that would, just throw him off. So after the show, I went out and asked Betty if she'd like to come backstage and meet Charles. And she said, no, I like a performer named what was his name? Arthur Blake. Arthur Blake did a wonderful Betty Davis impersonation that she liked. Charles's impersonation of Betty that night, shall I say, was a little, I don't know, blue and perhaps unkind. So Betty didn't want to meet him. Ironically, they were at a benefit together a few nights later. And she said, I've heard you're wonderful. And she's very gracious. But no, you're right. Carol Channing was the only star that ever saw him.
Oh my gosh. Well, Kirk, we have so many more stories and pictures and videos to show, and we'll be right back with part 2 of our episode with Kirk Frederick. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now let's get back with Kirk Frederick, the author of Write That Down, the comedy of male actress. And now let's get back to our interview with Kirk Frederick, the author of Write That Down, the comedy of male actress Charles Pierce. Come on back in, Kirk. Hello there.
Hello again. Charles and Paul Lind and I have joined you again.
Yeah.
My den. This is my ego wall of all me and my friends. There's Charles Pierce, there's Betty Davis up there. So welcome.
Oh my gosh, that just must be so nice to go in and sometimes just look around and laugh.
Yeah. There's not a day goes by I don't miss him.
All right. We talked earlier about some of his impressions, and we saw a bit of him doing Eleanor Roosevelt in the Dick Cavett interview. So I think we have a picture of him doing Eleanor Roosevelt.
Talk about dated.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who today wouldn't even know what she looks like or sounded like? But that definitely her. Now, what's that furry thing with?
Well, that he had a funny, remember those little old fur stoles that, I don't know, my grandmother and my mother both had. They had sort of a jaw spring thing at the front and a tail, and you'd put it around you by attaching the jaw to the tail.
Okay.
I found one of those in a thrift shop. Charles loved thrift shops and found one. And so this was, one was, what were their names? I can't remember the two names. This is Minnie and this is Miney. And Minnie does not speak. She's the tail. She's the bottom. And so he had 10 minutes with the fur thing that he would do. And Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin, get out of the water. You'll catch your death of polio.
Let's see Katharine Hepburn, who goes into
goes into doing Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh my goodness, there's a picture. Yeah. Oh, stunning.
Lion in pussy in summer.
Let's watch that clip.
I remember Humphrey Bogart and I were in the African Queen. We were captured, you remember, by an evil tribe of pygmies. We had to join their little nudist colony. We had to take off all of our clothes and jump over a raging campfire. We did not do well. He was blackballed and I was deferred. King Henry was a bisexual. He loved sex twice a year. He saw that laying around the castle and he asked if he could wear it. And it fit. You have to know what I'm talking about American know what I'm talking about.
Oh my! Now the pictures that we have are a lot of studio shots. How often would he go into a studio and get portraits done?
At least once a year. It was one of those things that his characters would change costume, and so he'd have to get some new shots made. And it's interesting to note, and I noticed this, of course, when I was writing the book, all the pictures of him are in black and white.
Yeah.
We didn't have color way back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So, but,
was that a choice, do you think?
Well, it was partly because, when you sent publicity shots to newspapers, they print in black and white in those days. So he didn't go to the expense of color. So there are very few actually color photographs of Charles existing. People would come in and take pictures of the show, and there would be slides. And we have a few, but for the most part, no. He was in the era of black and white.
Well, okay. So another characterization, Mae West. That's another gay icon. He must have had a lot of fun with Mae West. I love the story about he did Mae West as a 9-year-old.
Yes, I know. You did. I love Dick Cavett saying, so was it Mae West as a 9-year-old, or you were 9 years old doing Mae West? Both were true, actually. Charles started impressions at 9.
He said his mother gave him that line. Did his mother was she able to appreciate his success?
Absolutely. It's a very funny line, actually, in Harvey Fierstein's new book about when they were on the set of Torch Song Trilogy, and Charles was in the big cabaret scene with everyone. And his mother was visiting the set that day. And Charles went to Harvey and Ken Starr and Matthew Broderick and all the people that were in the scene and said, now, my mother still doesn't know I'm gay. So it's like, Charles, your mother knew you were gay when you were 9. Come on. But he was one of those people that was, that was a time when you didn't discuss these things, and so he didn't. But his mother was just as funny as he was, and sent him a lot of material, actually.
Fascinating. Let's watch his Mae West.
Oh, boy.
We can't do a show without Mae West. And she can't do a show without us either. Oh, Frankie and Johnny. Oh, they were lovers. They were also hairstylists. Lordy, how they could tease. Ladies and gentlemen, from one high-heeled step beyond, from the Twilight Zone, the return of Mae West.
They asked me the other day my definition of the perfect lover. I had it for them, too. A man who could make love to you until 4 o'clock in the morning and then turn into a pizza. With all this horsehair and foam rubber and whalebone, I don't know whether I'm a great star or a 5-piece room group at Levitt's Warehouse.
Very, very funny. Now, in that clip, he was backstage. He probably just finished doing one character.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then he comes off stage. And is that you helping him get the script up?
Yeah. And that was actually at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. So there were 2 other people helping. It was a very union-oriented house, and I wasn't union at the time. So I just sort of guided them. But yeah, the joy of his act, I think, for a lot of people in the audience, was that he would trail us. So say after that Mae West segment, he would go off with the boa still trailing, and he'd get all the way off stage, and one of the assistants would grab the boa and keep pulling it off slowly as if Mae West were still walking off stage. And by then he was out of the costume, into the next thing, and on as Katharine Hepburn. And the great thing about the Mae costume, as extravagant as it looks, it was all one choker, one boa, one dress, Velcro, wig, gone in seconds. and he kept talking into the microphone and doing the changes, and things are going on, and he's still, so you never lose the voice. And then all of a sudden he'd be going, oh, Mae West, she had a good time. And now here's Katharine Hepburn. Bang, just like that. So it looked like one of those men. Wait a minute, does he have a double? It was, yeah, very
now, there was in other clips, and in this one we saw an orchestra. How big was the orchestra? And did it travel with him, or was it just put together when you got there?
That specific show was done at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion here in Los Angeles. It was first did it in 1978, and it was such a huge sellout success. He came back, and then when he redid it in 1984, the Playboy Channel actually filmed that, and so they hired an orchestra. I think it was a 30-piece. It was a good-sized orchestra. It was the biggest band he'd ever played with, and so he got kind of spoiled by that. Normally, his nightclub show was a piano. That was it. But when we went to Las Vegas, of course, Ann Margaret's orchestra in the whole pit. So he had that orchestra, and he said, oh, I like this big orchestra idea. Well, of course you do. It's that. But the only other time we did it was at the Venetian Room at the San Francisco Fairmont Hotel, where the Dick Bright full orchestra was there every night anyway for dancing. And so we hired them, and Joan Edgar, our wonderful musical director, had all the music copied and orchestrated, and so Charles had a complete orchestra behind him for that too. But mostly in the nightclubs, it was just a piano. Wonderful.
We have a picture of he as Joan Collins, who some of our younger viewers might be someone they recognize. And, what was that from for Joan?
That was when Joan Collins was so popular on Dynasty. Charles met her at a benefit, and they were both on the dais together, and he said, I do you. And she, oh, how am I? So she was fascinated by that idea, and she gave him, the costume designer gave the design for one of her outfits that Charles had replicated, and one of her wigs that she could copy, that Charles could copy. And so he did a routine on her mostly while she was popular. Charles would really try to keep up with the times, whoever was on TV at the time. If they were impersonatable, he would do them in his show. And Charles loved Joan Collins, and that was a very funny section of the show. Oh, what do I put behind my ears to attract men? My legs.
Works every time.
Oldest show in the world.
and then there's Tallulah Bankhead. Oh my goodness! Oh, what a presence she was, and
bigger than life.
Did he ever meet Tallulah?
No, never did. No.
Yeah.
No. It's ironic that he never met Tallulah or Marlene Dietrich or Katharine Hepburn or any of those ladies, but they heard about him, and I think for the most part they were flattered that he impersonated. I think Tallulah knew. Tallulah was probably the most impersonated actress ever, because I gravity based. She always sounded drunk. Yeah, I think you may have the clip. I don't want to give away the line, but there's some very funny lines that came out of Charles ad-libbing as Tallulah Bankhead.
Let's watch that clip.
Darlings, I drink only to pass away the time until I get drunk. I think my left tonsil just gave, I'm not sure. My husband never knew I was an alcoholic until I came home sober one night. That drink, Joan, is awful. Tastes like something you'd sit in to remove a tattoo. Stop the music, darling. Ladies, never break wind in your pantyhose. The bubbles run down your legs and blow your shoes off.
So funny. Oh my goodness. Now, how many characters would he do? How long was the show, and how many characters would he do?
The show is usually about 90 minutes, and he would do usually the basic 6. He opened with generic blondes, when he would do Marilyn Monroe and Barbara Stanwyck and the generic blondes, and then you go into we can't do blondes without Mae West. So he'd say, just a minute. And he'd go off and fast change it right back on. It's Mae West. And then that would lead to Katharine Hepburn. And that would lead to Betty Davis, who had a bitch fight with Tallulah Bankhead back and forth. Tallulah, your mother couldn't. Why? Oh, she only called you Tallulah because she couldn't spell blah. So that would go on, Betty and Tallulah. And he used to end the show, mostly in San Francisco, with Jeanette MacDonald in full drag on a swing out over the audience. And so that was the big finish pretty much all through the 70s. And then people didn't know who Jeanette MacDonald was anymore. So he took that out of the act and would just end it with his generic, his nom de drag was Celine Kendall. So Celine would come back on at the end of the show in sort of basic brunette drag and a long, beautiful dress and just do some more comedy material. Or that Celine Kendall. Yeah. That was the opening. Yeah.
So during the interview with Dick Cavett, he mentioned that, and I like that distinction that he used. But as that character, would you consider him a drag queen?
He never liked to call himself a drag queen for some reason. I don't know why. It's not that it was pejorative or anything, because he loves drag, and we went to see a lot of drag shows. He really thought of himself more of as an actor. And so hence the name, the male actress. That really got started when we were doing Geese, and he really was a man playing a woman. So the male actress sticker kind of stuck for a long time. And so it was a very hard thing. It was very hard to call something, and everybody called him a female impersonator because that's what the genre was called at the time. But I think he really did prefer people to refer to him as an actress, because he was always in full drag. He never appeared in drag off stage. He wouldn't go to parties. People say, "Oh, would you come to the party as Betty Davis?" No, that's what I do for a living. I don't know how you are about it, but he really likes the anonymity of being a man. Frankly, it's just.
Well, I can't imagine him being a shy person outside of drag. That's for sure.
People are they were surprised to hear that he really was nothing shy about him, especially after a martini. But he was. Somebody once said, "You look like a bank teller." I mean, he really was a very common-looking guy, and he liked that. This was an act. He did this for a living. He dressed up in different wigs and spent a lot of time working on his show. Almost every day of his life, he'd watch movies and say, "Oh, I could do that new Barbara Stanwyck line," So I loved the fact that he never took himself seriously as a drag artiste. Along came RuPaul and made a career of it. And Charles said, "Oh, I could have done that, but I didn't want to." He liked the cabaret life and just working in the clubs with a live audience. He just loved that.
Well, Kirk, we have a lot more to talk about Charles Pierce and your life after Charles Pierce. And we'll be right back with part 3 of our interview. Thank you so much, Kirk.
You're welcome.
Yes, there is more. So stick around for part 3. We have one more chance to talk to Kirk. We have one more chance to talk to Kirk Frederick, and this is it. Come back in, Kirk.
Here I am.
Oh, thank you. All right. So we have some pictures of you and Charles Pierce, and you can really tell the two of you liked each other and you were friends.
Yeah, great friends.
Oh, there you are. Now tell us about this story. Who is that, and what were you doing?
That was backstage at a theater in San Francisco called the Marines Memorial Theater, where the producer, Charles Duggan, said, "I want to produce a kind of big lavish show of Charles. We love him in nightclubs. He's great in cabarets, but he needs sets and costumes and boas." And so that was at the Marines Memorial when that was an engagement in the 80s. And pretty much everywhere Charles went, it seems that Charles wanted me there to kind of oversee, make sure that, well, when he was doing Jeanette MacDonald on the swing had to be solid, there was a time before I met him in the 60s when he was working in a little club in San Francisco called the Gilded Cage, where the spring broke. The swing, it was just rope, and he had swung on it so many times that it broke, and he went right in the audience. His heel clipped the wig of a woman sitting in the front row, took it right off. So he said, please, Kirk, make everything solid. So that was kind of my job. But and then when we went to Las Vegas in 1978, wonderful to work with Anne Margaret and all her people. Ken Billington, the wonderful lighting designer in New York, came to Las Vegas to do the lighting for Anne Margaret, and then did the special lighting for Charles, because Charles took very special lighting, nothing but surprise pink, please, my close-up. But it was a great experience, 20 years with Charles. We did become good friends. People often asked if we were ever lovers, and no, that wasn't going to happen that way. We were better working together.
Now, did Charles have a lover or a partner?
No, Charles never really did. Early on in the 60s, he had a couple. And then even he realized that he was married to his career, and it was very hard to be married to Charles Pierce. Who are you tonight? Well, like, okay, man, woman, whatever. And guys would go to bed and say, oh, do Mae West. No. So it was hard for him. He really, I think he started to write a book about himself, and I didn't even know this, but when I did the research on him for my book at the Lincoln Center archives, Billy Rose Archives, he had started a book, and it's the only time I had read that he really was sad about not being successful in love. He really did want to have a husband and his wife. It was kind of awkward for me because all along in our careers, I was always partnered with someone else. And I think he was a little jealous of that. He never said that, and I don't think it ever affected our friendship. But that was, I think, the one regret. He regretted that he never played Broadway. He really would like to have done a Broadway play. And he regretted that he didn't have a steady lover.
Wow.
A lot of close friends. Oh, boy, legions. But
there's another picture of you too.
That's the last picture ever taken of us. That was the last engagement he did at the Venetian Room. That's his suite at the Venetian Room at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. And that's what I got to wear during the show. I would bring him props, and it was always very elegant. He just insisted that I was in black tie, and he was a classy guy, really was.
Now, when did you write the book? Oh, there you are with B. Arthur. Oh my!
They were very close friends. That's a picture in my kitchen. She came for my 50th birthday party 100 years ago. No, because she and Charles were so close, B and I became close too, and she really was a wonderful lady. He didn't have a lot of close friends. In their last years together, they traveled a great deal to London, to wherever she was doing her show. And she said he was the brother that she never had. And he obviously said that she was the sister that he never had, or the girlfriend.
Did he impersonate B?
No, he did not. I think it was because he felt like any impersonation of B might be considered, and I don't know, not in bad taste, but certainly he didn't want to use her as a comic foil. They were too close. But she's probably the only other actress of the day that he could have impersonated. I mean, quick, do Meryl Streep. There were no bigger than life personalities like Charles did with Betty Davis and Tallulah Bankhead and Mae West and all the girls that were alive and big stars in that era. So,
when did you start writing the book, or when did the book get published?
I started writing it when, actually, you see, it says forward by Armistead Maupin. Armistead was one of the backstage managers at Beach Blanket Babylon when I was stage managing. We became good friends. And in 1976, he came to me and said, I've got this idea for a serial. And he had the 10 or 15 of them written, and I took them home and read them. And I said, you need to go to the Chronicle and get this thing published. Not that I had anything to do with it, because he took it in and they published it, and it was a huge success. But he said, Kirk, you need to, if you're a writer, and not really a professional writer. It's one of the things I do. I like it. But he said, you have to write what you know. You have to write a book about Charles Pierce. No one else is going to do it. You have access to, I was also his publicist, so I had books and photographs and articles and everything about it. So it was very easy for me to do the research, both at the Billy Rose Archives in New York and here in LA at the One Archives at USC. They have most of his papers and belongings. And so it took me about 3 years to do the research and the writing. The book was published in early 2016. So just over 6 years ago.
Now you said the foreword was by Armistead Maupin, and you have a clip in there from one of our good friends, Charles Bush. What did Charles have to say?
Well, Charles was very sweet. When I reached out to people about, inevitably when you have a book like this, you want to get little quotes from people about it. And Charles Bush was the main person I wanted to get. He was very gracious. I got his email from a friend. And so he said, what great news that a book is finally written about the brilliant and international performer Charles Pierce. Influential, and even better news that it's all so well done. This is one of the few books about a comedian that actually goes to the trouble of providing many examples of the performer's witty material. In the case of the hysterically funny Mr. Pierce, it is essential. Charles Pierce paved the way for every drag performer who has come along since, and Kirk Frederick has given him the tribute he deserves. So, Thank you, Charles Bush.
High praise, high praise.
And Armistead Maupin's foreword is lovely too in the book. So I was very lucky that influential people read the script of it before it was published and said, oh, please let me write something about it, because it's fun. It helps that I knew him so well and that I got to work with him and that I heard his show. I think I added up. I've heard the show probably about 3,000 times. So that sticks in there after a while.
So you stopped working. Or why did you stop working with Charles Pierce?
Well, I had a business in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s called Kirk Frederick Graphics, and we did advertising and graphics. And then along came computers in 1990. And I saw the writing on the wall that people weren't going to need advertising agencies and graphics people anymore with all the desktop publishing. So I decided, actually, I got a free cruise from a friend who was working at the newly formed Crystal Cruises. So I went on board and I loved the life. I thought, the graphics business may be waning a bit. Maybe I could go work on a cruise ship. So I got a job as the editor on Crystal Harmony in 1990. So I told Charles that I know he was retiring. He wanted to retire in 1990 as well. And I said, I think I will too, from the Showbiz Act. And I closed my graphics business in San Francisco and went to work on the high seas in 1991. Met the man that I've been with ever since, Michael Laughlin. We've been together 32 years. He was the dance captain. And I said, well, okay, let's try this. And it worked very well. And so I worked then on board for a couple of years, but I was then in my early 50s. And if you work on a cruise ship, you need the energy of an 18-year-old.
Now, did you live on the cruise ship?
Yeah, you have to. I had a 4-month on and 2 months off contract.
Wow.
So it was a lot of work. And those were, I remember sometimes being 16-hour days. And you work 4 months. You work every day for 4 months. Every day needs a newsletter and menus and all the things that I did on the ship. So after about 2 years of that, Michael was tired of dancing. I was tired of being the editor. So we moved back to Los Angeles, and I worked at the corporate offices of Crystal Cruises in marketing and entertainment. So that's how that switched.
You say he retired in 1990. That interview with Dick Cavett was 1981, right before the AIDS epidemic. Yeah. And then he worked through some of the early years of that. Did that affect his act any, or his approach to entertaining?
Interesting. That's a great question. And the answer is no, it did not affect it at all. Charles learned early on that what AIDS patients needed was humor. And they needed a good laugh, and they needed to be taken out of their situation. So Charles would actually do benefits for AIDS patients to raise money. There were a lot of cabaret performers were coming out of the woodwork to do benefits in the 80s. It was wonderful to be in that community of, San Francisco people like Sharon McKnight and Ruth Hastings and David Rain and all these fantastic cabaret performers who would do benefits to raise money for AIDS patients. And that's what Charles did too. He kept working. And there were nights when there were people wheeled into clubs. When we worked at the Plush Room in San Francisco, it was wheelchair accessible. And there were a lot of nights when AIDS patients would come in and Charles would go out after the show and meet them, and they would be very grateful that he was probably the last fun they ever had.
Oh my!
But Charles kept working all through the 80s. He felt he needed to. Just his audience needed him, and that's where he was. I admired him for that a lot.
When did he pass?
He died on Memorial Day in 1999. Yeah,
He had 9 years of retirement.
After 10 years of good retirement, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. About 8 years into retirement, and he fought it. Went into his prostate, and it just took him very quickly. Not a long, slow, painful death, but it wasn't. It was no fun.
No, that's not good. That's not
No,
good.
not good at all. But he died in bed at home with his wonderful friend Don Kobus, who saw him through the last 2 years of his life, taking care of him graciously every day. So, and by then I lived in a separate city. So and I was still working on cruise ships and never here. B. Arthur had to call me and tell me that he died. So, and I was out of town at the time. I didn't get the message till 3 days after he died.
What happened to all of his clothes, his props, his wigs?
Because he knew he was dying, he called every drag friend of his and said, "Come on over, take what you want." So there are a lot of people. The list of names is too long. I don't even remember them now. Of people that came over and got wigs and jewelry and costumes and all kinds of things. There was very little left for archiving after he died because he was very savvy about making sure that his friends got everything of his, and he passed it on. And he died actually a fairly wealthy man. He gave a lot of money to charity, gave a lot of money to the archives. He was so generous. He paid me way too well all the way through the 80s. I was making money like I had a business during the day too, and I was like, what am I going to do with all this money?
Now, that's true. You were running your graphics business and working for him at the same time?
Yeah. So graphics by day and drag by night. Yeah, it got to be a lot. That's why he had other dressers. I wasn't his only dresser for certain. But I know there's something about he loved me. He also adored a man named Herman George, who was actually a costume designer at Beach Blanket Babylon. And that's how he met Herman. And Herman would design costumes for him all the time. So Charles got to get new drags all the time and had a fabulous wardrobe, spent a lot of money. And he was constantly adding to his act. So it was great that he had people like Herman George in his life. A guy named Art Barkley, who was a famous costume designer in LA in the 70s, was doing his stuff for him here at Studio One. So he had a lot of people who wanted to dress him and coif him and do his makeup. It's great fun.
Oh, well, Kirk, thank you. And I'm looking forward to volume 2, 3, and 4 of your memoirs with Charles Pierce, because there's too much. There's just too friggin' much.
Too much. I'll be mentioning, I'm doing a new book called The Gayest Generation about the 70s in San Francisco. Armstead actually said he would write the foreword to the Charles Pierce book if I would write the history of San Francisco in the 70s. So with Christopher Stone, who was the entertainment editor at the Advocate, he's writing the LA view. I'm writing the San Francisco view, coming out probably next couple of years. We'll see. There'll be more about Charles Pierce too.
All right. Oh, thank you again. Thank you. And come back anytime you want to just chat or you have something to promote. We're here for you. Thank you so much, Kirk Frederick. Thank you. Again, I'm just so honored to be able to talk to these great people from all over the world, every type of business, occupation, everything. So thank you for being a part of it tonight, Kirk Frederick.